All righty, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of our Diversity Dialogues program that we have here at VCU School of Dentistry. I'm really honored to have three wonderful colleagues join us today to talk about their experience as veterans and to honor their service and celebrate as we had Veterans Day last week. And certainly we have a lot of retired military faculty. And so there were many we could have chosen from. So I'm so excited that they joined us. So the three with us this afternoon are Dr. Randy Coffey, who is an associate professor in the Department of General Practice. He's the course director for our large D4 clinical practice and comprehensive treatment planning course, which is a year-long course. We also have Dr. VaCora Rainey, who's an assistant professor also in general practice. No stranger to Virginia, one of our newer faculty here, but has been a clinician for many, many years and served in the Pentagon. And then last but not least, certainly we have Dr. Terry Imbery, who's been with the department, I believe, since 2006, if I read that part of his bio correctly. And I always like to joke with Terry because he is a Toledo native, Toledo, Ohio, and my wife is from Toledo, Ohio. So we're always talking about that. And he is a full professor in our Department of General Practice and is actually a full tenured professor, which is a bit rare for a clinician, at least at the School of Dentistry and probably nationally too, quite frankly. So well known and many accolades. So thank you so much for all being here with us this afternoon. We also have a classroom full of students and staff and faculty in our Alliance building that are having some pizza and enjoying the dialogue as well. So we will jump right in with our first question of getting to know these three faculty. So can you simply just share your story with us? You know, your story of origin, maybe about your upbringing, where you were born, what was your life like as a child or teenager? Maybe tell us a little bit about that and how that upbringing influenced your choices and sort of outlook on life, if you will. Why don't we start with Dr. Rainey?
Oh, sure. Okay, well, I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin. So I am a cheesehead. And I grew up with a single mom, and she was a police officer. So I think that was the beginning of it being okay to be in law enforcement. So being in the military probably was not that much of a stretch because that's kind of what I grew up with. But yep, I was always really good in school, really enjoyed school. So once I knew that, I was getting pretty good grades, I decided to just be a physician. But once I got to college, it changed to dentistry. But that's kind of a little bit of my background. I'm a youngest of four, so baby of the family, but yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. How do you think your mom being a police officer, how did that shape your outlook on life around like service and community?
I think the biggest thing is she's a strong woman, and it meant so much to be raised by someone like her. She has retired as a police officer, but she started a nonprofit. So just seeing that too, just being of service to the community and law enforcement. And she also, her nonprofit works with children. So a lot of parallels as I look back, seeing that I kind of mirrored her leadership in the community.
Yeah. Awesome. How about you, Dr. Coffey? Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you're born and how your family influenced you?
Sure. Well, I'm a middle child, so I have an older sister, but we're called Irish twins because she's only 10 months older than me, and a younger brother, native of Oregon, Corvallis. My dad's the other OSU, so Oregon State University. And then during Vietnam, my father was deployed, but instead of overseas, because he's a biochemist, PhD biochemist, we moved to St. Louis for 3 years. Following that, we moved back to Oregon, where he matriculated in the University of Oregon. And so I've always asked my dad, well, what team are you? Are you Beavers or Ducks? And he said, well, I'm 2/3 Beaver, 1/3 Duck. I said, well, that makes you a platypus, Dad. And he always laughs about that. But so following his PhD thesis, the whole family moved to his hometown of Wheat Ridge, Colorado, where the team mascot are the farmers. And the town hasn't changed in over 50 years. And that's where I started learning a little bit about my love for healthcare. My dad worked for an institute called CARI, C-A-R-I-H. It stood for Children's Asthma Research Institute and Hospital. And there are childhood asthmatics, many of them don't survive. And in the 60s, we didn't have good control of severe asthmatics. So part of the research was to check the blood of healthy non-asthmatics with the blood of severe asthmatics who lived in nebulizer tents most of their days. And so I donated blood all the time. I got interested in caring about people and seeing how my parents worked in the churches and in the communities, even following retirement as a hospice team duo for 10 years and being deacons and Meals on Wheels and all the things they did. It had a big part in my life. Childhood dentist, after my dad finished working at CARI, we piled into a Buick in the early 70s and landed in Rye, New York, where there was a Sloan Kettering Cancer Research Center. My mom and dad worked together side by side for better part of the next 25 years at Sloan Kettering and later in Florida at the University of South Florida. And so I found myself desiring a life in healthcare. Family dentist, interestingly, whose name is Frederick Kessler. Not our Frederick Kessler here, but the exact same spelling, exact same name. He was my family dentist in Rye, New York, also practiced out of his own home when you could do such a thing in Greenwich, Connecticut. And so he was a big part. He was very caring. So I desired a life of professionally of serving others, not only in my community and my church, but in healthcare. So that prompted me to go into dentistry. I better leave some room for my colleague, Dr. Imbery.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm number 5 of 6 children. Grew up in what we call East Toledo, Carlos, and that's on the east side of Maumee River, but we in East Toledo call it the right side of the Maumee River. So number 5 of 6 children, went to a parochial school, parochial high school, parochial college. I'm the first one to graduate from college in my family. My dad was a letter carrier. My mom worked odd factory jobs. In fact, she worked at Hostess Cupcake at night from 11 to 8. So we were off at school by the time she came home from work, but she always had a cupcake for us for the next day. So today I still have a Hostess Cupcake in my lunch every day. So some people don't like them, but I grew very accustomed to them. My dad always said, study hard in math and sciences, so I did. And went to a small college. Actually, my college I went to had the same size of my high school. So graduating high school, I had 186 in my class. I graduated from college, St. Joseph's College in Indiana, 186 in my class. I like working with my hands. I like science, so I decided to go into dentistry and applied to 2 in-state schools, 2 out-of-state schools, and went to the Ohio State University. And Dr. Russell and Dr. Dwayne Schaefer were in my class. We had a big class, and I'll tell you the truth, I never talked to them. I never talked to them until they came here. So that's my story. Oh, and why did I join the Air Force? Probably because during my junior year, trying to study, get all the requirements done, I was looking for a quick way out to get a job, and we had a lot of professors that were retired Air Force. I thought that would be a pretty good thing to do because I kind of admired them and looked up to them and figured if I could join the Air Force, I have at least 3 years that I could think of what I wanted to do afterwards, and ended up staying for 23 and a half years. And that was at a time when they weren't giving scholarships. So you just came in with, still had your student loans to pay off. So there was no student loan debt repayment and no scholarships that time I came in.
Okay. What was your class size at Ohio State?
I think it was 220.
Wow. So that was large. Yeah. And so I know Dr. Coffey mentioned it a little bit, but why don't you tell us about your first exposure to dentistry? Each of you maybe talked a little bit about, the path there, but what was your first exposure to dentistry, Dr. Rainey?
So I wanted to be a physician, but then when I got to undergrad, I went to Marquette University in Wisconsin. I enrolled into a summer program at the dental school. It was a pipeline program. And I really enjoyed it. I said, I learned everything I need to know. Dental school will be easy. I've done this summer program, should be great. So I really enjoyed that. And then the next summer, they hired me to be an RA for the program. And just really having a mentor, Dr. Daryl Pendleton, he's still my mentor to this day. He helped me apply to dental school and has always assisted me along the way, but it was a pipeline program that changed me from wanting to be a physician to a dentist.
Awesome. And Dr. Coffey, you mentioned a mentor a little bit, but what was your first exposure to dentistry?
I would say that in an undergraduate, I went to Fairleigh Dickinson University in Madison, New Jersey. Beautiful campus, a strong science program. And one of my best friends from the small high school I attended with about 135 in the graduating class, he said, come to Fairleigh Dickinson. So I applied to Cornell and a few other schools, but I ended up choosing Fairleigh Dickinson. A lot of it was due to my friend who was pre-med. But when I was in high school, where my dad worked at the Sloan Kettering Research Center in Rye, New York, not the Memorial Hospital in New York City that most are used to hearing about. This laboratory was literally the back parking lots fed into our high school football and soccer fields. So I was able to do kind of a mini research project with an immunologist named Dr. Castle. And so I would just walk through the school grounds, and we were allowed to do get exposure to doing research. So I worked with my dad. I thought, honestly, I'm going to go on and follow my dad's footsteps and go on to a PhD. In undergrad, more and more just felt the calling to treating people versus in a laboratory setting. My father worked cyclic AMP, cyclic GMP, and lots of just small, interesting research looking at the biochemical level of cancer and how it's caused, and looking at potential cures. But it was really my family dentist, and realizing that I wanted a career in healthcare that launched me into that desire. So we became Florida residents. In my final year of undergrad, I had to actually transfer credits back to Fairleigh Dickinson from University of South Florida when the Sloan Kettering branch in Rye was destined to permanently close. The costs of keeping it running as a nonprofit became astronomical. And the town of Rye, I suppose, wanted to build lots of really nice homes. So we all moved, and I ended up still graduating from Fairleigh Dickinson. But because I was a Florida resident, I applied to Chapel Hill and Emory and University of Florida. And that the decision was University of Florida. I was a Florida resident, although I thought that the two other programs were just outstanding. I was very glad I chose the program I did choose at University of Florida, because I wouldn't have met some of these great mentors otherwise, like the late great Dr. Jose Medina that Terry's heard so much about, and Dr. Parker Mahan, who's one of our, if not one of our nation's foremost, but one of our world's foremost oral facial pain specialists, up there with Dr. Okeson at University of Kentucky. And then of course we have the greats at the National Naval Dental Center in Bethesda. So that's pretty much how I transformed from a future in science to healthcare.
Awesome, thanks. And what about you, Dr. Imbery, kind of your first exposure to dentistry?
My mom said, I have a dental appointment, and on the way home from school, stop at the dentist. And I was probably fourth grade, and she says, if they tell you the price or whatever the cost, just say send the bill. So I'd walk out of the dental chair and grab my toy, and then they told me it was, $10, and said, my mom said, send her the bill. I mean, but you can't do that now because you have to have an adult with you. So I walk home from school, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. And I think I ended up by the time when I had all my adult teeth, my last restoration, I finally had, I think I had 2 occlusal amalgams and two surface amalgams. So that's not too bad. And I was congenitally missing number 28, and so is my wife. And I thought her kids would be congenitally missing 28, but they're not. But so the dentist made me a space maintainer, abandoned loop. And one day I was eating a sugar daddy, and I pulled it off and went back to him, and he was really mad because he couldn't get it to fit very well. So, and then I had orthodontics, so that was my exposure to dentistry.
Yeah, so your sugar tooth, I mean, your sweet
I
tooth
still
is
have it.
really natural. Yeah, because you still have it.
Yeah, it's hereditary, I think.
So why don't we transition a little bit to talk about your decision to enter into the military or armed services and what that journey was like, what prompted the decision. Dr. Imbery shared a little bit about folks he looked up to there at Ohio State, but let's start with Dr. Coffey. What about, and I know your path has been a little bit different in terms of involvement with the Coast Guard, the Indian Health Service, and the Navy. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up on that journey.
I would love to. Okay, so in dental school, many of my mentors, including the academic dean, Dr. Joe Kehoe, endodontist for the Navy, and one of my main oral surgery mentor, Dr. Hilton, was a retired Navy captain. And we had several others, Army, Colonel Hector Bethhart, Bill Shreve, and the list goes on. So most of my letters of recommendation came from military because I decided that with the influences that they gave me, that a Navy career looked like an outstanding opportunity. So I also requested the GPR program, and they said it's only the top 5% of the class. I didn't know where I stood. I guess I was just so busy waxing up crowns, and I didn't realize where I stood, but I got into this residency at Great Lakes Naval Medical Command. My first daughter was born less than 2 weeks into my arrival. And so first miracle of my life occurred right there, one floor above Southern North at Great Lakes Naval Hospital. Enjoyed a wonderful year in a hospital environment, intubating patients and serving with oral maxillofacial surgery the entire year. You were never off, even when you were not on call. You had to go and have breakfast with the oral surgeons at a little town right outside of Great Lakes, and a place called Egg Harbor. And then we would eat breakfast, then we'd go on ward rounds. Immediately following ward rounds, we'd have a lecture every single Saturday morning. And it just provided an additional opportunity to learn more about the complexities of our patients. So following the GPR, I found myself literally 12 hours from being deployed to Adak, Alaska, 1,200 miles west of Elmendorf, Alaska. Less than 12 hours before flying out, and half my household goods were already crated and sitting in Elmendorf. The orders were canceled. What had happened was my daughter was diagnosed with a congenital cataract. It was not diagnosed at birth, and despite discussions with the pediatric staff, this was not discovered until after I graduated from the program. My next door neighbor who lived behind the emergency room with us was one of our ophthalmologists. And I said, before I leave for ADAC, we've been told everything's fine. Long story short, she was diagnosed with a cataract. My orders were canceled 12 hours before leaving. And the department head, the oral surgeon, said, and he was a man of a very tough constitution. I never seen him well up before. And so Captain Bedford Smith said, okay, well, you did well. We normally like to have an operational tour before we give you this, but we're going to give you Jacksonville Naval Hospital. So another little over 4 years at another naval hospital. And as my career progressed there, I was offered Hawaii or I think it was Camp Lejeune. And I said, that's great, but is this going to be continental United States or OCONUS, which means outside of continental United States? They said, well, you'll be green side, which means you can deploy with the Marines. I said, okay, well, I really appreciate you wanting to keep me in the service, but I'm going to have to transfer out because I have to take care of my daughter. Too long a story, but I was single parenting for a while. then met the love of my life. We're going on our 30th wedding anniversary, but my oldest is 34. That helps me remember how many years I've been practicing dentistry. And so a lot of changes occurred. I stayed in the Naval Reserves. I learned about the United States Public Health Service. And I've gone in uniform to talk at other universities, including my alma mater, University of Florida, another university in Florida called LECOM, to discuss the career opportunities of not just the DoD, but the other opportunities that avail. And if one just Googles it, you'll see the FDA, the CDC, the Bureau of Prisons, the United States Coast Guard, and the Indian Health Service, and HRSA and ICE, all these organizations you hear about on the news, but very few know that actually there are commissioned officers serving in uniform. And so it's the Federal Uniformed Services. So there's more than the Army, the Navy, and the United States Air Force. There's also the Coast Guard, which is a military branch, although it's funded by Department of Homeland Security. But the United States Public Health Service offers many opportunities for those who want to work in uniform, not own their own practice, and travel the nation. And the Indian Health Service and the U.S. Coast Guard both called me. And the Coast Guard had a little bit of a delay due to some top-heavy captains that were getting ready to retire within a few years. So the Indian Health Service invited me to join them. And I never knew how coveted the billet was, but the first duty station was in Albuquerque. And I strongly recommend, if you get a chance to go out to New Mexico, they call it the land of enchantment for a reason. The sunsets are undoubtedly beautiful on both shores, but I would recommend seeing the mesas and buttes, the oranges and the purples as the sun sets. And I worked on one of our Native American reservations called Jemez. And after being with them for a couple of years, I was invited as a brother of the tribe. And it was very, very hard to take that next launch to the U.S. Coast Guard. But what I will tell you is being invited in as a member of their family, into their homes, into private ceremonies, I can't begin to tell you the richness of the experience. The diversity of my career has brought me here. I've been teaching with Academy of General Dentistry for many years, but I just wanted to share that having the diversity of moving from Navy to Indian Health Service to the U.S. Coast Guard has allowed me to embrace so much more of what makes our nation tick and the beautiful people that live in this country, and the opportunity to treat our military, as well as our life-saving heroes of the Coast Guard, as well as our very own Native American people. It's been a joy.
Thanks so much, Dr. Coffey. I mean, that's quite a journey. Dr. Rainey, why don't you tell us a little bit about, what drew you into the Army in terms of serving?
Sure. So I actually went into the Army as a direct commission, which means that I had already graduated dental school, and I didn't really know for sure what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I wanted to live. I didn't know if I wanted to specialize or not. So I thought maybe I might try the Army just in case I wanted to specialize, because I know they have excellent training for specialties. So I chose the Army because I am more familiar with that branch. My brother served in the Army, and my favorite dental school instructor was a retired Army prosthodontist. So it was the branch I was most familiar with. And so as a direct commission, even though it wasn't a scholarship, I got the perk of picking where I wanted to live. So I said, well, I want to work in Washington, D.C. area. I figured I'll just live somewhere for 4 years and before I decide what I wanted to do. And that worked out. And when it was time for me to report for duty, it was September 15th. It was 4 days after 9/11. So it was like, okay, this was something that I was not anticipating. Our country at war. So it was a unique experience, and I was going right to DC. And I found out I was going to the Pentagon shortly after I arrived, and that was kind of eye-opening. I arrived at the Pentagon maybe 2 months after 9/11. So, but it's been a rewarding experience. I really enjoyed working at the Pentagon because it was a tri-service clinic. So I worked alongside Air Force and Navy. And so I know a little bit about all of the branches. So it was good.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Dr. Imbery, you shared a little bit about folks you looked up to, but what kind of was the pinnacle for you going into the service?
It was a job that was guaranteed, basically. So I did a general practice residency in Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And then tell you a funny story. We got our assignments like in November, and I wanted to go to Europe. I didn't get Europe, but I got my first choice in the US, which was Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. So everyone was jealous. Oh, you're going to Myrtle Beach. It's so beautiful. You could golf and that. And then they told me I was going to Myrtle Beach, but you don't get your orders until like May. So the head enlisted guy comes into my cubicle and says, we have your orders when you come to my room, and I give them to you. So between patients, I went to the room and he gave me the orders. And it's like a stack about that thick. And it says, you will report no later than, August 31st, 1984 to Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. And I looked at that and I said, well, they told me in November I was going to Myrtle Beach. He said, they always change things. I said, well, my wife had just got married. And I said, my wife thinks we're going to Myrtle Beach. He said, Air Force changes things. So I was kind of gloom, and I saw my next couple of patients and the orders sitting on my desk, and I start just paging through them. So he played a trick. So he whited out Myrtle Beach and put Minot, North Dakota. He made like 50 copies, put it on top. So I was, he got the best of me that day. But I ended up at Myrtle Beach there 5 years. Then I did a 2-year residency in San Antonio, Texas, went to Plattsburgh, New York, which was on Lake Champlain, very beautiful. Just 20 miles south of Canada. Then I got an assignment to South Korea for a year. Had to leave my wife and family. I had a 1-year-old son and one in first grade. So I had to go to Korea for a year. And then if you go to Korea, they give you your first choice coming back. I wanted to go back to Ohio, but that wasn't available. So I went to Langley Air Force Base down in Hampton. Stayed there for 5 years, and it was time to move again. So I moved to Edwards Air Force Base, California, kept my family there at Langley, stayed there for 2 years, and got promoted to colonel. They let me come back to Langley stayed another 5, and it was getting kind of long, about time to move again. And Dr. Sabatini, I was stationed with Dr. Sabatini and Dr. Boyle. Dr. Boyle was now retired. Sabatini retired and came up here. John Boyle, prosthodontist, came up here, and I think Rob Sabatini gave me a call and said, hey, they're looking for a general dentist in the general practice department. I didn't reply. So I liked education, and I applied, and I've been here since November 1st, 2006.
Awesome. That's, it's great to hear you guys' journeys, and like Dr. Coffey said, kind of the diversity and the richness of your experiences. As someone who didn't serve, one of the things I appreciate and find interesting about your service is that it's not just the practice of dentistry, right? It's not just the clinical acumen that you get so many great experiences in. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about those things outside of just the clinical service or the clinical dentistry that you were doing, whether that's leadership or other things that you feel like you gained, or just other unique experiences that the service gave you. If you could maybe share a little bit about that with our group. Let's start with Dr. Imbery.
Okay, well, I never shot a gun before, so I got to shoot a gun. Because I was going to Korea, I had to qualify on a firearm. So I went to shoot a gun. It was a .38 caliber, I guess. And a pilot was next to me, and a little airman, she's probably 19 years old, girl. And I could barely hit the target. It was the first time shooting a gun, but the pilot and this little girl were putting the bullets right through the thing designed as a heart. So I got to shoot a gun. That was the best part, I guess, but I wasn't very good at it, which is okay. But I did find out that people that were expert marksmanship, they get to have a little badge, I guess. And there are quite a few dentists that were expert marksmen. And I wonder if that has to do with hand-eye coordination, why I'm so bad. They were so good. But I could barely hit the target. But it was a cold day. It was rainy. I remember that. So I never shot a gun. And the shell would come off, and a couple of shells kind of would go down my shirt. And those things are hot. So yeah, I didn't like that. So I shot a gun and that was it. But the neat thing about it, I got to meet a lot of different people from a lot of different areas, different backgrounds. I remember I was reading a story about some guy was writing an editorial, and he said the best thing that happened to him, he was drafted in World War II, and he grew up in a small town, never left the town. And he went to, and he was in the army or whatever, and he met all these different types of people from different types of places. And so did I. And I think that was probably the best thing that could happen to me, meeting different people from different places and living in different places. And, everything is different than
Awesome.
Toledo.
How about you, Dr. Coffey?
So I thought what I would like to share would be, I did qualify for extra pistol in the Navy, and then the Coast Guard brought me out on the windiest day ever to Cape Disappointment, where there's a lighthouse. And I'd never shot a rifle in my life, and I'd only shot a pistol twice before, once for the Navy's expert pistol thing. But so that day I got expert rifle, expert pistol. I just, so you just line these two things up, and that was kind of a fun experience. You're not allowed to wear those ribbons in the public health service unless you're detailed to the Coast Guard, because it's a military branch. So I thought that was interesting. If I was working for CDC or FDA or ICE or HRSA, you wouldn't be able to wear that because there are non-military branches. But what I like to talk about really came into play during Indian Health Service. The tribe of Jemez Pueblo, spelled J-E-M-E-Z. These folks are so caring and so loving, and they have lots of community centered events that occur on weekends, and they're very big in running. Some of the lead runners in the nation for the Pikes Peak run come from Jemez Pueblo, because their training, their lives are at way above sea level. They're 6,000 feet. So my oldest daughter and I, when she was just a little kindergartner, first grade, second grade, third grader, we would go up on weekends and join these big opportunities where they would have booths for dental and medical and social services and several other aspects. And there was always a run walk, and we always took part. And we also, my wife and I also enjoyed being highly involved in the spiritual life of our family and of others. So we've always served as educators in wherever we've lived. Probably one of the most involved I ever was in Astoria before going off to my second residency in Bethesda for the 2-year advanced comp program. Starting off just in music ministry, and then was asked almost right away to serve on something called the vestry, is back when I was Anglican. And then about a year or two in, our priest said, I am moving, and guess what? Because I ended up becoming what's called the senior warden. And the senior warden's in charge of the entire church. You get the keys to the church, and you're the one who signs off on all the nonprofit investments. And I said, well, I'm not worthy of this. He goes, well, that's why I'm giving you the keys, because you feel that way. I said, well, I'm not worthy of it. I don't have the training. I don't know how to invest. But so for a long period, I had the keys to the priest's office and the church and the whole thing, and had to sign off. But fortunately, there were these elders that knew how to invest and how to take care of all the financial matters. I said, I'll sign on the dotted line because I trust you all. Then we went off to Maryland, to Bethesda residency. And that, of course, one of my mentors says, I own you now. I'm your parent, or I'm your family now. You're going to live here. And so that's not true, but I took it to heart and probably slept only 2 or 3 hours a night. And by the way, for any of the dental students listening, don't do that. Get your sleep. About squeezed every last drop of endogenous cortisol out of my adrenals during those 2 years. So it's not a good way to live. You need to get your sleep, put the work in, but get a good night's rest. Get recuperative sleep. I seriously did 2 or 3 hours a night for 7 days a week. But following that, I was promoted when I got to the Coast Guard Academy, one of the 5 military academies. Very few people, I shouldn't say very few, but not many will know that the Merchant Marine Academy is actually is one of our academies, along with the Army, West Point, Air Force, and the Continental Divide in Colorado, and then of course Annapolis, and then the Coast Guard Academy in New London. But One of my favorite duty stations was Astoria, Oregon, because it was so small. But on a day-to-day basis, though, I love the academy because here we have our future of this service. They are here, whether it's the direct commission, like Dr. Rainey talked about. We have the direct commission officer program where we have prior, say, aviators for Army or Marine Corps, and they decide, I want to fly for the Coast Guard. So we have a direct commission officer program, and they come to the Coast Guard Academy. Then we have the cadets, not nearly as big as the Navy or the Army, with 300, with 1,000 per class, but 300 per class. So we're taking care of about 1,200 future leaders of one of our military branches. And I've really enjoyed every part from beginning to the advent of coming here to VCU. Immediately following my residency in Bethesda, it was put out, we need some lecturers for the fellowship exam for the Academy of General Dentistry. And I rose my hand as one of the representatives for public health. And the chief dental officer in Washington, D.C. said, okay, you've got it, you're doing implants. So I wrote a 68-page study guide for the fellowship exam on diagnosis, treatment planning, stage 1, stage 2, maintenance, and restorative implant complications. And then spent the next probably 4 or 5 years teaching the implant section for that 2-day fellowship exam review course. And it's an honor to know that we have others here that are fellows with AGD. And so that's what got me really launched into wanting to teach, was that experience teaching nationally.
Sure, thanks for that. And as our time is getting away from us, I'd love to hear from Dr. Rainey and Dr. Imbery kind of what drew you to education, whether that's here at VCU or education more generally. How about you, Dr. Rainey?
Sure. So prior to being at VCU, I started teaching in the community college level. I was adjunct faculty working with expanded function dental assistants, and I worked with dental hygiene students. So I have a passion and love for allied health. So that's what prompted me to think about being an educator as a full-time career. I was transitioning out of private practice and wanted to just do something different. I thought it may be even outside of the field, but I figured I'd give it a chance and try this full time, and I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. And Dr. Imbery, how about you? I mean, you talked a little bit about, Dr. Sabatini kind of opening the door for you in a way, but what drew you more formally to education?
I really enjoyed my 2-year residency. We had to do a research project, and I was able to get 3 of them done and 3 of them published by the time I left. And so I really liked education. And then I was offered a position to go back and teach the restorative dentistry at the 2-year program, but the assignment officer said I had to go overseas instead. So I went overseas. And when I came back, they sent me to Langley, and I got to be associated with the 1-year AEGD there for a couple of years. So I like the education part, working with students and trying to stay on top of things that are current in our profession. So that's what I like about teaching.
Awesome. And for those who don't know, Dr. Imbery is extremely well published. You should go to Google Scholar and see his citations and current works. But this has really been a joy to just get to know each of you a little bit better, to honor just a few of the veterans that are among our faculty here and learn more of your story. And that's one of the purposes of Diversity Dialogues, is just to really have open conversation about people's journeys and what's brought them to this point and what's brought them to dentistry and how they influence our students in the greater dental community. So thank you to those of you who joined us virtually, those of you who joined us in Lions 424, and of course to our 3 panelists who shared their story with us. Any parting words at all?
Thank you, Carlos.
No problem. Thank you.
Go ahead, Cora, Dr. Rainey.
Oh, well, parting words. I'm just enjoying myself here at VCU. My favorite part about being at VCU are the students. They bring me life, D1 lab, all that. And I'm just glad I made this decision to be here.
Real quick, I just want to say, Dr. Imbery just kept saying, Randy, hurry up and retire and apply to VCU. So we served together on the board.
You guys can blame me for that.
And of course, this is for everyone who's heard me talk about the first dean of University of Florida. He started the oldest known Gold Study Club in the United States. It's actually at Bethesda at the National Naval Dental Center. And it was from Dr. Jose Medina, as one of the founding fathers. And he's quoted as saying, "We strive for perfection, but we'll never get there. But we must seek excellence every moment of every day with every patient." So I've been imparting that to all the students, and I hope that they know that and feel that when they're working with all of us as we share freely and with all our hearts. We share all that knowledge that we've been given from all of our great mentors that have helped get us here. And I want to thank Dr. Smith for bringing us all to this wonderful event.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.